phosphate, it kind of lives in two worlds. It's nice to figure out and make sure you can get a Tesla in your driveway, but it's also nice to know that you're going to have food in your fridge. And so with that phosphate, having it in a Western jurisdiction, having the type of phosphate that's going to work for food and power, I think really illustrates the importance of this deposit.
Hi, and welcome to Behind the Wall at InvestorPlace. I'm your host, Joanna Macris, and today we're back talking about a very interesting stock, Arianne Phosphate. The company is a development stage phosphate mining company, very interesting opportunities, and sits squarely in two of my favorite things in the food space and the alternative fuels space. So here to talk to us more about the story is Brian Ostroff, CEO of Arianne Phosphate. Hi, Brian, and welcome.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So I think a lot of our viewers may not be aware of what's going on in the phosphate industry. I think most of us know that a good chunk, I think 85% of the world's phosphate is used for fertilizer, but prices are soaring right now. So talk to us about the macro trends, what's going on, and why this has become a bit of a crisis, so to speak.
Sure, great. Well, again, thanks for having me. To your point, yeah, 85% of the world's phosphate is used in fertilizers. And look, I think we all understand that fertilizer is food, but it's something that's just kind of taken for granted. And I don't think most people understand where the phosphate comes from and maybe what that means. So just so your viewers know, most of the world's phosphate comes from the Middle East and North Africa. Jurisdictions here like North America, South America, Western Europe, a lot of areas of Asia, we're all in deficit. And that deficit continues to grow because our demand for phosphate grows every single year. So we're reliant on the Middle East and North Africa. Morocco is by far the world's largest. It's a good address, but it's an address in an area where, Tunisia used to be number 2, and Arab Spring took care of that, and Syria was a producer. And so I think, look, I appreciate the audience here because, we go to the supermarket, we get our food, all's good. But I'm not sure people understand the supply chain and how all could not be good pretty quickly.
So what's been the impact of China's ban on phosphate exports? How has that impacted the ag industry?
Yeah, great question. So where the Middle East and North Africa are kind of the big players in the phosphate concentrate, the ingredient that goes into phosphate fertilizer, China is a big player in the actual phosphate fertilizer market. So that would be guys like MAP and DAP, and they represent 30% of the market. So just thinking about that, the Saudis are 14% of the oil market. You could just imagine what would happen if we came in one morning and heard that the Saudis weren't going to ship any oil. Well, you've got China at twice that size in the phosphate fertilizer market, and they've removed themselves from the market. On top of that, you've had Russia that is now put on export quotas on fertilizers. So, to me, I see those who have this stuff making sure that they will continue to have this stuff and have what they require for their populations, to feed their populations. And then there are those who don't. And so it's disruptive to the market. It is your first domino in the food chain that's falling. And again, just bringing it back to North America, we are not self-sufficient. And that deficiency grows every single year. So, to your point, yeah, prices are moving up quite a bit. But the other thing about a lot of these ag commodities, fertilizer, phosphate, they run pretty long cycles. So from an investor to understand this, the last cycle, phosphate topped out in 2012 and didn't bottom until the end of 2019. So you had 7+ years. And we've been in this uptrend since about summer of 2020. So to your point, yes, we've had a pretty nice move off of bottom, but historically we're only a year and a half into it. And so we're probably looking for a lot more.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about the company specifically. You kind of have some interesting advantages of location and quality. You know, not all phosphate is created alike. So talk to us a little bit about how you perceive, you know, your assets and how they might be uniquely positioned.
Yeah, you know what, that's a great point. So, some of your investors maybe that are more familiar with things like gold or copper, when you dig that out of the ground, if you're digging your gold out of the ground in Nevada or Argentina or Siberia, it's all the same and it all trades for the same price. When it comes to phosphate, you will get differences deposit to deposit. Most of the world's phosphate comes from sedimentary deposits, which is over 90%. And the challenge with those types of deposits are there's other deleterious elements mixed in there. So you've got radioactive elements, you've got heavy metals, and depending your application, mostly food, this isn't good. And we try and manage. A lot of times I'm asked, is there, a substitute for phosphate? And yeah, the substitute is starvation. So we need the phosphate, and we try and deal with these deleterious elements. Now, to your point, Arianne's very fortunate. We have an igneous deposit. They're pretty rare. There's maybe a dozen in the world. And that allows us to make a very high purity phosphate concentrate. So in terms of food or other applications, which we'll probably get into a little bit, we are ideally suited. So in terms of the project, we're igneous. It allows us to make an extremely pure concentrate. It also means that we can sell it at a premium price. So again, gold is going to trade the same price everywhere all the time. Phosphate, you will get paid a premium based on that quality. So we've got a good high purity concentrate that can be made. We're situated in the province of Quebec in Canada. So in terms of security of supply, access to a market, ideally suited. And the deposit is extremely large. And in fact, today it is the world's largest greenfield deposit. A lot of people throw around the concept of world class, but at the end of the day, when you're looking at Arianne and the Arianne deposit, you are looking at the world's largest, the world's purest, the world's safest. And so at the end of the day, I would argue that it is world class. And also, it's fully permitted. The project is shovel ready.
What does that mean? Most people may not know what that means. What does that mean?
Sure. So, the mining, getting to a producing mine is a long process. It's 10 years, it's 15 years. You've got to find the deposit. You got to drill it out, the metallurgy, the economics, all the way through. And that's a long process. You go through a preliminary economic assessment and a pre-feasibility, feasibility study, bankable feasibility study. It is a long process. And of course, you need your permits, your environmental permits, and particularly in Western jurisdictions. That's become an extremely strict process. So to get all the way through that is lengthy, it's expensive, and of course there's no certainty of success that at the end of the day, you'll find something that's economic that the government will then turn around and give you the okay to mine it. Mm-hmm. Arianne has been able to go through all of these steps. And so what that means today is we are fully permitted, and with funding, we can stick a shovel in the ground and we can start to build this thing out and produce the phosphate concentrate that the world truly needs.
Yeah. So, I mean, you alluded to, China's, dominance of the phosphate industry, and China has, control over a number of very important metals and substances across a number of industries, thinking about the lithium ion space, their dominance there. Do you see more, Western companies looking for alternative sources of supply? And is this becoming more of a national security issue as companies look to, be more self-reliant?
Yeah, so look, that's a great question. Um, as you had alluded to earlier, look, most phosphate does wind up in fertilizer, 85%, but more and more is making its way into specialty applications, and that could be specialty agricultural applications like animal feeds and things like that, but also industrial applications, and one area that I think is taken the world by storm here over the last year and a half has been the lithium iron phosphate battery. And as the name implies, you need phosphate. And of course, you need a high purity phosphate. So, I think ultimately China, what they're looking at is how are they going to be the player in the automotive market? Well, how are they going to be the player in the automotive market? Well, if 90% of the cars 10 years from now are electric, and 90% of those cars run off of these LFP batteries, and 90% of the LFP batteries are produced in China, well, who owns the automotive market? It's not Tesla, it's not BMW, it's not Ford, it's China. So yes, I think that to your point, you're seeing a lot of car companies starting to think about how do they control more of their supply chain, how do they get vertically integrated, and of course, a Western supply of phosphate is important, just like a Western supply of lithium or some of these other important materials, graphite, cobalt, although cobalt you're really not going to find in a Western jurisdiction. But yeah, I think that people are really waking up to the importance of these minerals and these mineral deposits. And again, phosphate, it kind of lives in two worlds. It's nice to figure out and make sure you can get a Tesla in your driveway, but it's also nice to know that you're going to have food in your fridge. And so with that phosphate, having it in a Western jurisdiction, having the type of phosphate that's going to work for food and power, I think really illustrates the importance of this deposit.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about that opportunity. I think the company made an announcement a month or so ago that your phosphate is being tested externally or validated externally. So talk to us a little bit about what the timeline could be and the evaluation process in terms of an EV battery manufacturer or other related battery maker looking at your product.
Sure. So I guess, yeah, a few weeks back, 5-6 weeks ago, we had announced that we were moving forward on late stage testing surrounding our phosphate and its use in phosphoric acid that's used by the battery companies. So we've been working with a bunch of battery guys and some automotive guys now for some time, 8-9 months. Again, because of the nature of our phosphate, we've shown up on these guys' radars. It makes a lot of sense. We've signed some NDAs and MOUs, which has progressed us to a point where we have specifications from a battery company. They want to see everything looks like, again, because of the nature of our phosphate, it should be no problem. So we have sent off our stuff for final testing. We should be getting results back. I'm kind of hoping end of January, February, that will substantiate that, yes, in fact, our phosphate is going to work just fine for the EV space.
And what could be potential next steps from there?
Yeah, so I think the next steps would be, and just the next steps even for Arianne as a whole, Our economics are pretty robust. It's a very large project, and of course, like a lot of large projects, it's going to be heavily reliant on debt. The numbers are extremely supportive of taking on a fair amount of debt, but phosphate's one of those commodities that if you're building a gold mine, it trades on an exchange, the gold. You can build, you'll have customers because you can always sell into the exchange. Phosphate, like most commodities, again, like a lithium, a niobium, a cobalt, they don't trade on an exchange. And so you enter into offtake contracts with potential customers that will commit to buy your product. So that's the stage that Arianne's at now. So, what these positive tests will mean is that I think a bunch of battery guys would be then willing to enter into agreements with us to purchase our product. So with Arianne, because our stuff works across the spectrum, I can do my offtakes with fertilizer guys, I can do them with battery guys, I can do it with food guys, animal feed guys. And so it just at the end of the day means it's more likely that I'm going to get my customers, and demand should be robust, prices should be good, and I should be able to get what I need to unlock my financing and ultimately much higher valuations, I think, in our company's stock.
Yeah. So talk to us, given you're in the development stage, pre-revenue, help our viewers get a sense for what the financial model looks like. What are margins kind of at a kind of a normalized level? Like, what does the business model look like at a normalized level of production?
Yeah. So in our bankable, we had a 26-year life of mine at 3 million tons a year of our finished phosphate concentrate. Now, subsequent to that, we've done a bunch more drilling. And although not 43101 compliant, we are kind of comfortable that we are pushing 50 years. Now, at 3 million tons a year, we are projected to be a pretty low cost provider. And I would say that at today's prices, you're probably looking at gross profits in the neighborhood of $450 million a year. Now, it's very easy, I guess, for someone to take the other side and say, oh, well, look how much prices have run. And, to a degree, that's true. So let's even take a worst case scenario. Let's go back to December of 2019, when those prices were at a low that they hadn't been in an extremely long time. Even at that level, we'd have gross profited to the tune of about 150 million. And so today, again, we're 450 million. I think that as tightness in the market continues, as food inflation continues, as other applications continue, as disruptions to the supply chain like China or Russia continue, I'm very much of the feeling that prices are going higher. Again, we've got a lot of commodities that have gone to all-time highs. We've got equities that have gone to all-time highs. Real estate's gone to all-time highs. It's hard for me to believe that food prices and food related aren't going to all-time highs. And again, now you pepper on things like the LFP battery and some other work, and you're just going to have more demand for supply that just for all of it has not grown much over the last 7 to 8 years. Arianne's really the only large scale project that during these bad times has been able to move forward. And now as the macros change, the industry has changed, and people have woken up to the fact of, wow, where do we get this stuff from? I think it definitely brings a lot of attention to Arianne and a lot of opportunity.
Right. And you have the kind of the trifold: location, quality, jurisdiction, all of those factors.
Size. I mean, we are an answer certainly to some of the world's problems. Certainly here in North America, we run a deficit. It's great to have wonderful soil in, Saskatchewan in Canada, or the Dakotas or Nebraska, but if you don't have the fertilizer, how are you going to really work that soil and get what you need? And again, it's not only just from food, decarbonization. So we all want biofuels. Well, you need corn for ethanol, and you need soybeans for biodiesel. How are you going to get that? You need to grow it. So, this isn't something that's going away. We've always wanted to eat. We're going to want to eat in the future, and we need to see that supply chain is protected.
Right. So, I mean, you're obviously managing a company and not the stock, but when we think about relative valuations, what do kind of comparable your peers kind of trade at in terms of like an EBITDA number, and, where do you see kind of the valuation trends going forward?
Yeah. So, look, producers in the space and like the market in general, those multiples will move up and down, but 6-7 times EBITDA on the low end, 11-12 times EBITDA on the higher end. Those are the valuations that you see for companies in production. Obviously, we're not there yet, but again, if you kind of take a look at north of 400 million in EBITDA, of course, we've got to go through our financing and take on debt and what have you. But today we trade at roughly in US dollar $80 million market cap. I can tell you as a 35-year veteran of mining finance, capital markets, I mean, it's almost unheard of. Our NPV of our project is $2 billion. We're trading at 5% of NPV, which is something you might see in early stages, but once you're fully permitted, I mean, you just don't see that. So if you take a look historically, single asset development companies, when they announce that their financing is fully in place, they'll usually trade to at least 1 times first year's projected EBITDA, which again, for us would put us at $400+ million. So, risk reward, necessity of the product, limited competition, and as well as everything you had said earlier about the size, scope, security, I think an argument could be made for why this thing is pretty cheap.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's the next milestone for you? Like, what's keeping you up at night, and what's the next kind of bogey that the company needs to hit to get things going?
Yeah. What keeps me up at night? Well, right now the macro's gotten a lot better, so nothing keeps me up too much. I do like where we're sitting. But to your point, what do we need to do? So as I had mentioned, the banks are good with this project. They want to make sure that we have customers. So that's really what my role is now, to just get those offtakes that we need. And I think the process is going well. Certainly, I love these other applications because, as I said, it expands my potential customer base. So for me, what gets this thing across the line is maybe over the next 2-3 quarters, bring home the rest of those offtakes and stick my shovel in the ground. Now, I should also note that large independent phosphate mines don't really exist. There's a few, but most of them are owned by the large integrated guys. And that's to the tune of roughly 85%. That 15% that's not vertically integrated, again, because of all of these challenges, China, Russia, the guys who have the excess phosphate concentrate building out their own operations. That 15% is getting harder and harder to find, to secure, and you're paying more and more. And so, does it make sense for someone not only to get an offtake, but maybe a piece of the project? That's a possibility as well. I often joke, investors right now are just starting to learn who we are, but certainly in the corporate world and in the fertilizer world, most of the corporates know who we are. And fortunately, we're on their radar. We're having those discussions, and a whole lot of value unlocks as we sign up a couple more customers.
Well, we're really excited to watch the story. You're sitting squarely within a number of growth opportunities, and we're going to stay tuned to what you're up to. Really appreciate your time and insight and being here. Thank you so much, Brian.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching Behind the Wall. Please like, subscribe, and comment. And check out our website, InvestorPlace.com, for early access to videos and an even more in-depth look.